we are moving to the next presentation by our young scholar, Mohamad AlAfghani, PhD, who is also an expert, as mentioned by Professor Sri Irianti, on water. And his topic of presentation is regulation, implementation, and the potential role of Islamic norms in river restoration in Indonesia. The time is yours. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The Honorables, Pak Rektor, Pak Kiai Haji Didin Hafidudin, Pak Ketua Yayasan. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor and a pleasure for me to be able to speak here about my passion, which is water. And as you quoted in your remarks, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ مَلِكُنْ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ, which is probably part of the topic that I'm going to discuss today. Next slide, please. So if we look at the picture, we are pretty much in a water stress condition. So Java is in the red. So these are during dry season, we have water stress. So a lot of scarcity in the island of Java, the red ones. If nothing changes by 2045, the majority of the GDP, our gross domestic product, will be produced is in the highly stressed basins in the Java and Bali area. Next slide. So we look at here, we have climate change and flooding, also in Bogor. So the last 10 years, the occurrences is increasing. More than 3/4 of Indonesia disasters are meteorological or hydrological. More than 3/4. We have earthquakes, we have everything else, but more than 3/4 are hydrometeorological disasters, flooding, landslide in Bogor, everywhere. So we experience it in our daily life. More than 100 million Indonesians are exposed to flood risk. You have experienced flood, although Bogor is quite high up actually compared to Jakarta, but we have floods too in Bogor. 325 cities and districts are classified as high risk in Indonesia. From 2002 to 2015, Indonesia suffered average damage of 367 million annually due to flooding. An analysis of 92 cities indicates that the number of reported floods in these cities are almost tripled from 50 to 146. It's not going to get any better, it's going to get worse. We'll have more droughts and we'll have more floods because of climate change. So it's not going to get better, I'm sorry. Next slide, yeah. And our river is heavily polluted. 53% of Indonesia's river is heavily polluted. Two of the world's most dirtiest river in the world is located in Indonesia. Citarum used to be the first, and then Ciliwung is the second. So you can see here, dirty river everywhere. And you can see there, I think Prof. Sri speaks about 70% of household drinking water sources are contaminated by fecal waste, fecal feces. It's when you go to the toilet and you drop something, that's feces. And it's in the 70% of Indonesian household population. Next slide. Now, my talk today is about river restoration, because this is about achieving SD targets 6.5 and 6.6. In the European Union, the law says that they have to attain good water quality. So what do we mean by good water quality? Is we have to enhance the status of the aquatic ecosystem by looking at aquatic flora, benthic invertebrate, and fauna. So if there used to be ikan lele in the river, it should be there. It has to be, if there are bacteria or germs or small creatures or fauna in the river, then it has to be restored to its normal ecological function. That's in the European Union. And previous slide still. Oops, sorry. Previous slide. Okay. So the driver there is the EU Framework Directive. Hence, the purpose of the law is not anthropocentric. Anthropocentric is human-centric. We use the environment for our benefit. But ecocentric, which is natural ecosystem, to restore the law, to restore the natural ecosystem, including the river. Next slide. Now, so this is what the mayor said this morning, quick win, quick fix, or the low-hanging fruit. People are straining up the channels to build things here, straining up. Of course, then when it floods, your house will be flooded if you're living next to the floodplains. It's called the gray infrastructural approach. You use channelization of the river. God creates the river in meander. It has a purpose. This is Sunatullah. It is for slowing down the runoff and the speed of the river, to provide the benefits for the flora and fauna. As you can see, this is in Scotland. The river is embanked, but the river claims itself. You know, this is my territory. What are you doing here? So it floods the plains, although it's already embanked. Next slide. So this is an example in Singapore. This is the different river, but used to be, they channelized the river. So the people run very quickly downwards. Downstream in Jakarta, if they are channelizing the river here, Jakarta can get flooded because it is very quickly the speed of the river. And it disconnects the river from the surroundings. But now in Singapore, they remove the barriers, they naturalize the river. So this is, when it floods, the water can come here, there. Because that's the Sunatullah. This is not Sunatullah. This is human-made. That's the Sunatullah, the meander. And it has, I'm not an expert in geohydrology, but it has certain ratio and mathematical calculation. Next slide. This is in the Dutch. They are making more room for the river, because they no longer can control using engineering, high what we call sort of gray engineering. Even the Dutch is the masters of the water. They said they have built a lot of dams. They can no longer control, so they have to provide more room for the river. Next slide. And this is in Scotland. So if you embank, the floodplain is disconnected from the surroundings. And so it creates problems downstream. It can create floodings downstream. So in Scotland, they are slowing the flow, returning the river into its normal ecological function. Next slide. Now, what about in Indonesia? So this is a legal analysis because I'm a lawyer on training, and I look at the regulation. Unlike in the European Union, there is no legal obligation, both of conduct or of result, to restore river to its natural state under existing legal framework. So the legal framework in Indonesia is anthropocentric still, not ecocentric. For example, we look at only class 1 for drinking water. That's human purpose. Next slide. Now this is in Jakarta. There's nothing political here. It's simply because everything is political these days, right? No, I've shown you the practice in other countries and in the world. The trend is not to naturalize the river and the ecosystem. So this is what they attempt. It's the legal framework is the governor regulation. The clauses can be better improved, but this is closer to the EU's approach of functioning ecosystem. And it's a departure from the national legal framework. It's quite different what's happening in Jakarta. Next slide. Now this is the common way of handling river through normalization. But it's very much gray infrastructure. They use banking, channelization, and dredging rather than nature-based solution. Next slide. Now, going back to the Islamic norm and quite related to the verse quoted earlier in the presentation. According to Ahmad, water is considered as hukuk Allah. I'm not yet an expert in Islamic water law, so I just see from English sources. I have to learn from Pak Rector and from Mr. Chairman how to speak Arabic. I speak English and German, but not yet Arabic. But I'm looking at it now. So, hukuk Allah is as opposed to hukuk al-ibad, as opposed to the right of humankind. The rights of Allah cannot be remitted, pardoned, relaxed, or compromised. The laws for maintaining water quality are not premised on property law or tort. They are ecocentric. So, of course, the ecocentrism here has the theocentric above. But it is quite sophisticated because this has been, the Islamic is quite a long time ago. So if you compare it, the nature has right. According to the principle, nature has right. So it's not human relation, it's the rights of God. So if you pollute the river, and this is according to Caponera, the gift of water entails a religious obligation deriving from the very nature of water, which is Surat Al-Anbiya, as mentioned earlier. So if you pollute the river, you are violating the rights of Allah. Why? Why are you violating that Allah? Because this is the materials for life. No water, no life. God stated in the Quran. So it is quite profound, the message. So now I understand that in trying to understand religion, we need knowledge. No, now I understand. Next slide. So this is from Harim. I did not quote the hadith, but it's quite established in the Islamic water law. The term Harim means inviolable zones. So spring wells have, like in Arabia, the river, have protected zones. Cannot enter the protected zones. It's called the Harim. Harim is mainly associated with water courses and rivers, but also applicable to land. So there is a buffer zone surrounding water body within which human activities are prohibited. They must remain undeveloped. So under Islamic law, Islamic water law, we know that there is a Harim, and the banks of the river, the flood, some of the parts must remain undeveloped. You cannot build infrastructure there. Next slide. So this is from the Ottoman Code. We have a colleague professor from Turkey, which is, I believe this is Arabic, Ottoman Turkish. The Masal, which codifies the Sharia in the Ottoman Empire, also regulates the Harim. It states that, for example, 1/2 the breadth of the river is equal to the breadth of the whole river. So at least you have to empty half of the side and half of the other side, according to the laws of the Ottoman Empire. Next slide. So to conclude, the world is moving toward river restoration, restoring to its normal ecological function. Indonesia is not yet there. There is an attempt in Jakarta, but it's quite difficult because we have to land acquisition, expensive to acquire land, and also it's quite contradictory with the national policy. Under Islamic law, water is considered the rights of God, in which officials have little discretion. The requirements in the European is quite concordant with Islamic law. So the EU seems to be quite the same with Islamic law because of ecological function, but not in our legal system. Next slide. Now, so this is my recommendation. In order to achieve SDG Target 6.6, to protect and to restore water-related ecosystems, regulatory and institutional framework must be in place. This would require water law and environmental law to be reformed so that it contains an obligation to conduct to protect rivers and floodplains that are still natural conditions and gradually restore developed floodplains. So naturalisasi must be embedded in the national legal framework. That's my academic stance, beyond politics. Okay. Islamic water law principle could have three potential roles. First is to provide insight for water and environmental law reform, because the verse is also quoted by the justices at the constitutional decision regarding water law. So it provides insight. Second, to motivate behavioral change. And the third is to increase demand side for government responsiveness towards healthy and clean water. Last slide. Now this is something to ponder. Yeah, this is a question to all of us. We are the world's largest Muslim population in a country. We have been taught about najis since childhood, and Islamic injunctions regarding water conservation is very strong. But why is our river dirty and our water sources 70% contaminated with feces? We should be the cleanest nation on earth. So I have several hypotheses which we can discuss in the discussion. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.